In order to apply the idea of similarity, we need a way to be able to quantify the similarity between two users or between two movies, for instance. And the way that we do that is in terms of this idea called cosine similarity. So we can visualize the cosine similarity geometrically. And in this figure on the right-hand side, we show 4 different cases. So if we forget for a minute the idea of users and movies, and just talk about line segments. Here we have line segments in xy plane, two-dimensional, and we have first a coordinate, an x coordinate a1, and another a y coordinate b1, which gives us this point 1 up here. At the same time, we have an x coordinate a2 and a y coordinate b2, which gives us this coordinate 2 up here. So now, a1 and a2 are pointing in the same direction, and b1 and b2 are also pointing in the same direction. And so therefore, they're pointing in similar directions. The entire segment is pointing in a similar direction. And we can quantify that in terms of the angle between those two segments by saying that that angle between the two segments is very small because they're pointing in a very similar direction. At the same time, we can look at the diagram in D down here, and we can say A1 and B1 are pointing in these directions, which gives us point 1, but A2 and B2 are pointing in the exact opposite directions, which gives us this point down here. So this angle is actually very large and towards 180 degrees, which means they're in almost opposite directions. And intermediate values, meaning if A1 and A2 are pointing in opposite directions, but B1 and B2 are pointing in the same directions, gives us a segment, an angle value that's not close to 0, not close to 180, it's closer to like 90 degrees. And in this case, we just have B1 and B2 pointing in opposite directions, but A1 and A2 pointing in the same direction. And similarly, we get an angle that's closer to 90 degrees. So now, if we think about what we were just talking about before with similarity, if these coordinates are indicative of users' ratings for a given movie, so for instance, users A rating of movie 1, users B rating of movie 1, and that's pointing in the same direction, meaning it's a positive representation, or similarly it could be a negative representation of that movie, and user 2's ratings are pointing in the same direction as user 1's ratings, then this angle is going to be very small. So if we actually take into account all of the ratings for 2 movies, for all the users that have rated those 2 movies, we can quantify the angle between the 2 movies. Or similarly, if we looked at the ratings across movies, we can quantify an angle between users and use that to calculate a similarity metric between them to see how similar they actually are. And so the way that we do that is we actually calculate the cosine of this angle, which is a geometric idea. The way that we find the cosine of an angle is as follows. We take the product of all the coordinates for the different points that are pointing in the same direction. So A1 times A11, A1 times A11, plus B1 times B11, and so forth. And we add all those together. We obviously have typically more than 2 users for the same movie, so we'd have C1 times C11 plus D1 times D11, and so on. And so basically what we're doing is we're comparing the relative values as the same user has attributed to those 2 different movies. And then we divide by the length of the segments just to normalize it. So now these terms are each going to be in terms of 1 movie, so we're going to have the 1's together, whereas before we were multiplying the 1's and the 2's, now we're just going to have the 1's on the same side together. So we have A1 squared plus B1 squared, and then we multiply that by A2 squared plus B2 squared, and so forth. And so this cosine value actually ranges between +1 and -1. And so if the cosine is plus 1, then that means that the angle is actually almost 0 degrees. So plus 1 indicates that they're highly similar or very strongly correlated. -1 indicates that they're highly dissimilar, which is still something that's useful, again, as we were talking about before. Then we could just predict the opposites for the two users. And something closer along to 0 means that there's really no correlation. So we want values that are either really close to plus 1 or really close to -1. But on the other hand, the values closer to 0 indicate that the angle is closer to like 90 degrees, like in this case. And that really indicates no similarity. So maybe A rated the two movies differently, but B rated them the same. Then maybe C rated them the same, D rated them differently. We can't come up with a way to find a similarity between the movies.